My friends, it is the 26th of September 2023 and I'm here at Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands. Today we're going back in time, to be precise the 24th of August 2020 during the COVID pandemic, when I did some recordings on a KLM Cityhopper flight from here in Amsterdam to Dresden in Germany. In this video we're going to take a look how traveling was during the first period of the pandemic, with a lot of travel restrictions in deserted airports. Thank you so much for joining and coming along, and let's begin our retrospective trip report. So just to rule out any confusion, once again, this is a retrospective trip report, where we look back at how traveling was during the COVID pandemic in the summer of 2020. Welcome to a deserted Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. The main plaza is usually filled with a lot of people, but here even the terrace of the La Place restaurant is cordoned off. Our flight for today will be KLM Cityhopper from Amsterdam to Dresden, the capital of the German state of Saxony. To fresh up your memory, traveling abroad was on an all-time low from April till June in 2020. From July, the Dutch government said it was okay to travel to some countries within Europe, and I took that opportunity to go to Germany. It wasn't easy though. Many countries had mandatory testing or quarantine, and vaccines weren't even available yet. In my case to Germany, if your country was on a high-risk list, you have to quarantine for 14 days or you have to submit a negative test. Luckily, the Netherlands was removed from the high-risk list, and so nothing was required to travel to Germany. Empty check-in desk and the presence of screens were a normal sight. Online check-in was available for the flight, but you still needed to pick up a physical boarding pass so personnel could check if you were allowed to travel. Face masks were mandatory in 2020 in the airport, but not everywhere. Only when 1.5 meters of social distancing could not be observed were you required to wear a face mask. The KLM Crown Lounge in the Schengen area was just reopened, and only during the morning from 6 till 12. Lots of empty seats of course, and food was on demand. Non-alcoholic beverages were available, and the only food option was a cheese sandwich or a ham sandwich. I opted for the latter one, and although it wasn't something special, it did felt kinda exclusive because everything was made on request. Time to go to my flight, departing from gate B28. Lounge 1 is the area before the B and C gates, and it is one of the most crowded places in the airport. It feels surreal to walk here and for it to be this empty in the late morning. An area designed as B0 was where documentation checks were being held, mainly to Italy because that country had some very strict rules of all the European countries. Gate D0 and E0 were also installed for documentation checks for passengers heading outside the Schengen zone. Here's our aircraft for the flight to Dresden. It's always Cityhopper when traveling to Dresden, but because demand was so low for so many destinations, KLM Cityhopper operated to many more destinations than before the pandemic. A below 100-seater jet was easier to fill up than their Boeing 737 of course. Boarding commenced and everything looked very normal from here on out, except for the tiny detail that everybody had to wear a face mask, and it was really enforced this time around. Wet wipes were handed out at the door, and the flight was just filled for around 30%. Boarding was therefore completed well before departure time. Here's another funny anecdote for you. From August 2020, all people, including staff, were required to wear a face mask when social distancing wasn't possible, unless you were behind a screen. Before, staff didn't need to wear a mask inside the airport, but they could remind passengers to wear a mask because it was against the rules. I mean, how could you take that seriously? This wasn't my first flight in 2020, but it was the first one since the worldwide COVID outbreak, and I remember I was genuinely excited for this trip. Flight time today will be exactly 1 hour. It's basically the first time that I wear a face mask.
Switched off in a few minutes. However, we do recommend to keep your seatbelt fastened whenever you are seated. If you need to collect your personal belongings, please be careful when opening and lunch bins, as their contents may have moved during the takeoff and could spill out. And ladies and gentlemen, for your information, the lavatory in the front is for crew only, but you can still use the lavatory in the back.
Service commenced right after the seatbelt sign was turned off, and to my surprise, everything was normal as it used to be in 2019. Every passenger was served a sandwich with a cookie, a cup of water, and a drink of your choice. Many airlines had abolished their food and beverage service on board, and you were lucky if they had prepared a snack box for you waiting at your seat. But at KLM, it was just business as usual. After the meal service, info sheets were handed out to all passengers. Here you could read what was expected from you as a person entering Germany. For me it was nothing luckily, no testing or quarantine, I could just enter without problems. Later that same year I had to go to Düsseldorf, but then the Netherlands was on the list of high-risk countries. A negative test was required to enter, and I remember paying around 100 euros for a single test, which is ridiculously expensive when thinking back at it.
10 minutes after landing, we'll arrive rather quickly at the parking position. We're nice and early today, we'll arrive there about 15 minutes before the scheduled time of arrival. Temperature in Dresden is at 20 degrees Celsius, some are broken clouds and there is very light wind. Hope you enjoyed the service on board this flight towards Dresden. Thank you for your attention and I wish you a very pleasant day. Cabin crew, prepare for landing.
We have landed safely in Dresden, and there were actually a lot of interesting things to see on the tarmac. A Qantas A380 was here for a new interior, but it was put on hold because of the pandemic, and it later flew to Victorville in the USA for long-term storage, only for it to be reactivated at the beginning of 2023. An ancient Airbus A300 from Unitop Airlines, still wearing the China Eastern livery, was hanging out there as well, plus an AirAsia A330 in the background. Chengdu Airlines, Vietjet Air, and Pegasus were present as well. Nice to see exotic planes here in Europe during a time when traveling outside the EU felt like impossible. We got into parking position shortly after, and I remember the airport being so eerie and quiet, just the sound of escalators rattling. I mean, just look at this, nobody here except for a few souls. Dresden is a regional airport, but this is just surreal. I took the S-Bahn train to my hotel in the city center and enjoyed my few days in Saxony. This part of Germany is really pretty. And since traveling is unrestricted again, I highly recommend you to come here if you have already visited the more common sites in Germany. Looking back at this trip, I'm glad the COVID pandemic is well behind us now. Shout out to KLM for maintaining a relatively normal level of service throughout the pandemic. A return ticket to Dresden cost me just 108 euros, which was booked a month in advance. It was very unique to travel on empty planes and to stroll around desolated airports. But that isn't very sustainable for a business, of course. So I'm happy to see that the travel industry in 2023 is flourishing again. And that was KLM Cityhopper from Amsterdam to Dresden during the first period of the pandemic. Thank you so much for joining in and coming along. Take care guys, and we will see each other in the next video.